Hey everybody, this is Patrick O'Halloran from IDERA. Version 8.9 of SQL DM, its official name is SQL Diagnostic Manager for MySQL and MariaDB. It's got a very, very long name. I refer to it as DM, SQL DM for MySQL. New release came out this week, version 8.9. It's a very great product. I've been working with it for about 2 years now. It's got a ton of uh, usability and provides a ton of good information about monitoring MySQL databases. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it is, in case you're not familiar with it, talk about the features and functions that came out in the new release this week in version 8.9, talk about how to upgrade from 8.8 to 8.9, and then a couple bonus features. Some of the features and functions deal with the API, the application program interface, which will allow you to control SQL Diagnostic Manager through scripts or through programs. I'll talk about that some because that's a nice feature. And as another second bonus feature, I'm going to talk about the sniffer. So these are two, I think, very powerful features of SQL DM that people may not know about. Be aware that in the panel for GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, there's a section that says handouts, and this whole PowerPoint presentation is available. You can click on that and download it as well. And if you do that, look at the speaker's notes. When I do these presentations, I try and do a good job of including a ton of notes down here with useful information. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into SQL DM. So it was previously known as Monyog. It's been around about 20 years. It's a tool for monitoring MySQL and MariaDB databases. It installs either as a Windows wizard or a Linux package. It monitors and reports on MySQL activity. So you give it a list of credentials to connect to MySQL databases, logins and passwords. It connects, and every second, every 5 seconds, every minute, depending on what metrics it's collecting, it gathers data with very, very little impact on the monitored system, gathers that and stores it locally in a database. It's agentless. We're not changing anything on the monitored instances. We're not installing anything. We're not modifying anything. So it's a very low impact. It's an on-premise application, meaning that you identify the server where you want to install DM for MySQL, and it can run locally. Now that server could be on the cloud, could be the actual physical machine. Install process is very, very, very simple. We tell people that it takes 2 minutes to install. That's probably if you take a 1-minute break. It's very easy to install, and is up and running very, very quickly. And then it monitors on-premise and cloud instances. Lots of stuff we monitor, lots of versions of MySQL and MariaDB, going back to 5.1, and also all the various cloud instances. This slide gives you kind of an overview of the architecture of it. So the server is installed on DM for MySQL is installed on a server, either a Linux or a Windows server. It includes an HTML server as part of it, as well as a SQLite database. SQLite is just another relational database system. All that's installed locally. You give it credentials to connect to various databases. And as I said, once a minute, every 5 minutes, or on depending on the scheduling interview, it connects to the databases, pulls back performance data, metrics, things like that, stores that in that SQLite database. And then end users who are using this, the DB admins, will use a browser, Chrome or IE or Firefox or any other browser, connect to where DM for MySQL is installed through a browser, and bring up screens, look at performance data, configure alerts, and do things like that. You'll see that DM for MySQL can also send email notifications and Slack and PagerDuty and other kind of alerts as well. But this is the basic architecture. The SQLite database is self-maintaining. There are third-party products if you want to look at the data in there. There's in fact even browser extensions which allow you to look at the tables. They're just stored in .dat files. The schema for that is in the documentation. It's fully documented. So if for some reason you need to pull data out of that SQLite database, there's third-party tools which you can run, as I said, as browser extensions from the command line or run from scripts. You can run select statements against it and pull out data, migrate the data to a data warehouse or to a console or wherever it needs to be. So the schema we use to store all the data is publicly available. How do you get it? It's available for a free trial. You can go to webyog.com, and on there is both SQLyog, which is an admin tool for MySQL, and product formerly known as Monyog, now known as SQL Diagnostic Manager for MySQL, which is for monitoring and reporting on performance issues with MySQL. We have a lot of people who are migrating from, say, Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft changed their licensing structure, and now Microsoft SQL Server is getting a lot more expensive. A lot of people are moving to MySQL just because it's a proven technology now, which it wasn't really 5 years ago. So people are willing to run their business applications on it. So a lot of people are moving into being DBAs for MySQL, knowing other databases, but not knowing MySQL real well. SQL Diagnostic Manager is a great tool because you can use it to get information, important information about the performance out of the system. Setup's easy, as I said. It runs as a wizard. In Windows, it runs as a package. In Linux, it installs very quickly. In the 2 years I've been doing this, I've done a ton of demos. I've helped people with trials, dozens or hundreds of trials. I have yet to get a single question on, hey, I had a problem installing this product. It's one of the nice things about it. I used to be in software development, and I've written a lot of code. It's nice. It's this application just works, which is, as a developer, it's kind of disappointing that people expect problems with it with software, but this really does work very well. Okay, so just remember that you can go to webyog.com. You can download it for a free fully functional 2-week trial. And if you have any questions whatsoever about that during the trial, you'll have my email address at the end of this presentation. A couple of people came in a little late. I'll just mention that in the webinar panel, there's a section called handouts, and this whole PowerPoint presentation is available there. So my email address is at the end. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or have any issues. All right, here's the meat of what we're here for today. What's new in 8.9? And there's 4 general areas. The query load profile screen, which is a really cool improvement in being able to look at the history of a SQL statement and see what it's been doing. The new APIs, some security improvements, and fixed issues. So the query load profile is an addition to the screen when you're doing query analysis and looking at the results from the sniffer. And the APIs, as I said before, are a way of doing administrative tasks within DM for MySQL, adding servers, configuring alerts, turning them on and off, things like that. Those I'll talk about in more detail at the end. As I said, there's a little bonus section at the end. Security improvements, and then fixed issues. So the query load profile, if you can get to that through Query Analyzer, that's where you can see the slow log and the general log and the sniffer results. When you're looking at the sniffer, I have a couple screenshots coming up. You can look at individual query performance over time. And then when you click on a particular query, in version 8.8 and prior, you would get an explain plan. You get a query plan, and that was about it. Now there's a lot of additional information there that's very helpful. And then you can also get to this through the dashboard tab. When you're looking at custom charts, if you click on one of those, it can take you to the Query Analyzer tab and give you more information on that. So this is the Query Analyzer tab, and I'm looking at the sniffer. And again, I'll talk more about the sniffer, what it is, because it's a very powerful feature. The 3 options available down here are slow log, general log, and sniffer. The slow log and general log are maintained by MySQL. They're either files on disk or they're tables where when certain criteria are met, queries run slow or weird things happen, data gets written to those logs. Sniffer is a pseudo log, and I'll get into more detail a little later, but it's a nice feature of DM for MySQL that can pretty much track every single SQL statement. So when you're in Query Analyzer, when you're looking at sniffer, you get the top 5 statements here. Top 5 statements in terms of percent grand total time. So this is an idle system. This is one of our demo systems. It doesn't have a lot of activity going on this day. I took this snapshot. You can see that the total time is under 3 seconds a second. If this were a production system, I would expect these numbers to be much higher. Could be minutes, could be hours. You could even theoretically have days of processing taking place. The new addition on this screen is that we've got these overtime charts. So now not just having queries per second and execution count and total time. I've also got these charts that show it over time with peaks and things. And when you're doing performance analysis or identifying potential performance problems, being able to analyze over time is a huge plus. I've done years of performance analysis and troubleshooting and things like that. Being able to identify a good time versus a bad time when something's happening allows you to maybe identify a conflict identify when there's a surge in users that are trying to do a particular thing. Maybe there's a batch job running, maybe there's two conflicting jobs running. A lot of times, uh, performance issues are temporal. They happen at a certain time, or they happen when certain other jobs are running. So being able to analyze things over time is a huge feature. The second nice thing is if you click on any particular statement, you can see that in addition to this query plan that you got before, now there's a ton of details here about how this thing has been executing, rows being generated, temp tables being used, how selects are done, how sorts are being done. This also gives you just a ton of information about execution counts, how many full table scans are being done, poor index being used, it's identified by MySQL. So all that information is available there. So now there's a ton more information that helps you not just identify that there's a bad statement, something that's taking a lot of processing time, but when you drill onto it, you get a lot more information about what potentially is the cause of that. Are we doing a ton of disk sorts? Are we doing a ton of full table scans on large tables? I can see from here that the rows sent, rows examined is pretty small, 39, 40 rows. So the fact that we're doing full table scans probably isn't very important. But if this were a large table that I either personally knew it was large or saw here that there were a large number of rows being examined, then the fact that there were full table scans might give me some concern. That might tell me that I need to look at indexes, look at the tables, look at how the tables are being accessed. And that might help me identify performance issues. And this idea of the top 5 statements versus this column down here, when I'm doing performance analysis and troubleshooting, and I don't know what I'm looking for, this is a very handy way to start. Let's just start with the statement that takes the most processing time, the most latency, the most time it takes to execute that statement, and fix that. And once we fix that, maybe we purge data, maybe we added an index, maybe we rewrote a join, whatever it is, that statement will go away. And now the next statement will pop up to the top. And it's an iterative process of just identifying the most expensive statement, addressing it in some way, and then you have a new worst statement or new busiest statement. That's just a nice handy way of doing this iterative process of performance tuning until you get to what I call good enough. It's never going to be perfect, or it's never going to be as fast as possible, but at some point you've freed up enough resources that things are running fast enough. Also down here, you can see that I've got, I can specify a specific query. So if I'm looking for a specific column, specific table, all these column headings are sortable as well. So I've got a lot of ways of troubleshooting this and looking at data. Second thing I want to talk about is the APIs. So the application performance interface, application program interface. So a way of getting to DM for MySQL and performing administrative functions without going through the GUI. So whether it's through a shell script or a command line or some other way, there's a lot of things you can do. And as I said, in the little bonus section, I'm going to talk about some more features and functions of the API. But basically what we've added is the ability to change user passwords and LDAP bindings through the API. And we'll see how specifically to do that in a later section. There's some ideas here on what kinds of things you can do: change monitors, add delete servers, change settings, and so on. A few security improvements. If you've looked at the roles that users have within DM for MySQL, you can pretty much restrict what tabs people have access to. Can they get to Query Analyzer? Can they get to real-time? Can they get to dashboards and so on? Now you got the ability to restrict individual custom dashboards. So if you're creating custom dashboards, you can decide that some users can see them, some users can't. You got the ability to restrict users from creating custom dashboards, hiding literals and strings, hiding literals and emails. You can now add or remove or rename the default admin login. In previous versions, that was hard coded in there, and you couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't delete it. You couldn't rename it. And you've got the ability to do that. There's some fixed issues. These are pretty specific things. When I looked through the list of them, they all start with the text of "in certain situations, some things happen." If you've had, and you shouldn't have, but if you have experienced any particular problems with MySQL in the past, you can look at this link and see what's been fixed. There's a section in there also that talks about known issues, and right now that known issues page is blank. It says there are no known issues with SQL DM. If you have any questions, if something's not working the way you expect it to, if you think something is broken or you're not sure or you're positive something is broken, again, my email address is at the end. If you want to email me, I'll be glad to take a look at it and help you with it or report it up the chain to our product development people. All right, so we've got upgrade. How do we upgrade to 8.9? I did it on my laptop. It took about 30 seconds. Basically, you download 8.9 and you install it. Act like a new install, which in Windows is a wizard, in Linux is a package. Everything you've done before, any settings you have, users, roles, customizations you've made, custom SQL objects, servers you've created, historic data, all that's preserved. So you just download 8.9, install it, and you're up and running with the new features and functions. I said I was going to have a couple bonus features just because I didn't have a lot of time to talk about what's new in 8.9. And there's a couple features that when I do demos, I kind of gloss over and try and give people an idea that these things are powerful. But I don't think they're used that much, or people may be missing out on them. So I wanted to talk about the API and the sniffer in a little more detail. So again, the API's application program interface allows you to access some of the administrative functions of SQL Diagnostic Manager through scripts and schedule jobs and automated systems. The data itself, as I said, if you want to look at performance data for servers, that you can access directly through the SQLite database. You can run queries against it. Again, the database itself is documented, the structure in the documentation. So all that's available. You can run queries directly against the SQLite database and pull out whatever data you need. But the API calls do administrative things, turn collectors on and off, add servers, modify servers. We have a customer that in a single instance of SQL DM is monitoring 1,200 instances of MySQL. They obviously did not go through the GUI and click on edit server or add server and type in 1,200 different connections. You can create a script that does that. You can create a data file that has host name, port number, username, and password, and just run a script that will go through using the API to add all of those servers. And then the calls to the API can be handled any way you can submit an HTTP request. So that web server I talked about that brings up the GUI, that's what receives those API calls. So if I can go to here's the API that's fully documented in the documentation. So all the capabilities are in there, all the parameters you need are in there. But here's an example of me using a command called curl, which is a URL submitter, Windows-based URL submitter. So basically, it's just running this URL, HTTP localhost 555. I got MySQL running locally on my machine with all these parameters, and it responds back with a status and a response. So what I tried to do here was to turn on all the data collectors for every server that has the tag production. If you remember, when you create servers, you can give them tags, labels, or names. You can label them production, dev, QA. They could be named after an application. They could be named after a geographic region or a data center. This particular case, I submitted to my local instance of MySQL, a command to start data collection for every server that has the tag production. And it comes back and says, it failed because there were no servers found. Well, I don't have any servers on my local instance that have that tag production. I just wanted to give you an example of this. So the API is invoked as a URL. In this case, I'm doing it through CURL. I could just as easily open up a browser and submit this URL with these parameters on it, and it would do exactly the same thing. In fact, I think, do I have a browser open? I do. So if I take that same URL, which I've got here, and fire this up and type in that URL and hit enter, I get the same result. So whatever way you can submit an HTTP request. HTTP request is a URL, a document request essentially. The question mark and everything after that are parameters that are passed. So the HTTP server that is running DM for MySQL is getting this request, recognizing these parameters as a request to run some administrative function, tries to process it, and then gives you a result. So that request could be done, as I said, through that command line, through this function CORL. You could paste it into a browser. If you're running Java code or Python or anything else, any way you can generate a string. I think I also had an example here of if you use Telnet, I can use Telnet to get a TCP connection to the server, and then I could just type in raw HTTP commands to do that exact same thing. So theoretically, if I had any kind of TCP connection to port 555 running on my local machine, I could submit this HTTP GET request with these same parameters, and it would do exactly the same thing. So there's examples in the documentation of using in Java, I believe it is, using various functions to create the HTTP request to submit these kind of API requests. So nice features, nice function. As I said, you can add, edit, delete servers. You can change passwords. You can start and stop collectors, enable, disable alerts, globally, and enable and disable the sniffer. There's a few other features and functions you can get to through the API. But if you have a large number of servers you need to work with, a large number of MySQL instances you're monitoring, it's a handy way of automating that. If you're always adding new servers, or servers are changing names or something, it's handy to develop one script that takes a couple parameters. Then you can use the API to add new servers very quickly just by running that script with a couple parameters on it, rather than logging into the GUI and going through the add server process. All right, the second thing I wanted to talk about that's already a feature in previous versions and is in 8.9, and again, this is something that people may not be aware of, is the sniffer. It's available under the Query Analyzer tab. I said before that the Query Analyzer tab has 3 sections. There's the slow log, the general log, and sniffer. And slow log and query log are logs maintained by MySQL, completely independent of our product DM for MySQL. Sniffer is a pseudo log in that it tracks activity in several different ways, using the performance schema, using show full process list commands. It pulls back performance data and saves it in the SQLite database, and then allows you to browse that historically. So when you're editing a server, when you go to the servers tab, click on a server, right click on it and say edit server. Under the advanced tab, you can turn on sniffer, and then you can specify if it's performance schema process list or MySQL proxy. I would recommend performance schema. That's a schema including some tables and processes and things that by default is installed when you installed MySQL. Has information about in tables about events and activities and things that are happening with MySQL, and applications like DM for MySQL then can query those tables to give you information about locks and SQL statements, execution, running, process. That's where we get information about rows returned and select types and sort types and things like that. If for some reason you have disabled the performance schema, you can run it on, you can turn on process list sniffing, which gives you a little less information, but that basically just runs show full process list commands to get information about what's going on, what threads are currently existing. It's very low overhead. The performance schema method runs once a minute. It just runs some select statements against those tables, performance schema tables, very low impact. The process one is a little higher impact in that it's running once per second, but it's just running a very basic command, show full process list, to get back information about threads and SQL statements and statuses. So when you go to, this is a quick snapshot of the GUI for DM for MySQL. When you go to Query Analyzer, I said before that there's 3 modes: sniffer, slow log, and general log. You can specify a server and a time frame. We saw this screen earlier when we were looking at these new graphs. The top 5 statements here for this time frame based on percent grand total time. And then down at the bottom, this is more configurable. I can search for specific queries. I can search for queries that had errors or missing indexes or poor indexes and bring those up. I can also sort on all of these column headings. If I sorted on this column heading, it would match this one exactly. But if for some reason I'm interested in slowest queries, I can bring that up. If there's a query I know which is associated with a particular process and that individual query is slow, maybe it's part of an ETL process or a report generator or something, I can find some unique text in there, and I can filter based on that text. Maybe it's a table name or a column name or something else in there. And when you drill down to an individual statement, we saw this before, a lot of information over time about this statement execution, query time, total counts, rows returned, all that. This one I would be a little more concerned about in that it examined 300,000 rows with a full table scan, but the execution count is high enough. It ran 1,000 times. So really it's examining 3 rows per execution. So that's not too bad. If this execution count were lower and we were looking at 300,000 rows and we were doing full table scans, I'd be very concerned about the statement. I'd find some way of rewriting it. But this statement itself looks fine. Those are the 2 things I wanted to show you, give you a little more in-depth knowledge about the API, which if you're doing administration for DM for MySQL, adding servers, turning collectors on and off, that's a nice way of automating it so you can run scripts or that run on schedules through Windows Scheduler or through cron and Linux that can perform these administrative functions. That's kind of nice. But again, if you haven't seen this product before, if this is your introduction to it and you want to do a full trial, you can go to webyog.com and you can just click on download free trial. You have to specify some simple information about email address and name and stuff like that, but it's a fully functional 2-week trial. I believe it's limited to monitoring 10 instances of MySQL. The product itself, if you buy it, is very cost effective. It's, I believe, $400 in that range per user, regardless of how many instances you're monitoring. So that customer that's monitoring 1,200 instances, or 100 instances, or 50 instances, or 20 instances, or 10 instances, are all paying the same in per seat fees. I believe you can actually buy it. Well, buy now. It's right there. You can buy now, so you can click on that. It'll show you the pricing based on how many licenses you're buying. I highly recommend you do it. It's a very simple install process. The product itself works very, very, very well. If you do choose to do a demo, I've got it up here. The one thing I will tell you is that you can click on this little expand button and see the names of the tabs. And the second thing I would tell you is the documentation. If you click on that, it brings up the wiki, and under Navigate SQL DM for MySQL is this overview, servers, dashboard, monitors, threads, real time, which exactly matches what's here. So if you do choose to download it, if you're not familiar with the product, look at the documentation, look at Navigate SQL DM for MySQL, and as you're looking at, say, monitors, this gives you a ton of information about it. And if you do want a product walkthrough, I'll be glad to do that. I'll be glad to take some time to walk you through all the features and functions of the product. And again, if I go back to my PowerPoint presentation, here's my email address, patrick.o'halloran@idera.com. I thank you for attending. Thank you for watching. Like I said, if you're not familiar with the product, feel free to download it. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your day. And as I said, I'll hang on for a minute or two just to see if there's any questions. But thank you very much.